My aunt owns a large piece of land in northern Tennessee, right on the edge of a state park. We've always called it the farm, even though there aren't any animals or crops anymore, just acres of old fields, oak trees, and winding trails that disappear into the woods. When I was a kid, that place felt like my second home. I knew every inch of it, every slope, every old fence post, every fallen log that looked like it had been there for centuries. Some of my favorite memories are from summers spent there, catching fireflies with my cousins, sitting by the creek that ran behind the property, and sleeping on the screened porch, listening to the cicadas hum all night long. Back then, nothing about the farm felt dangerous. If anything, it was the safest place in the world. But that changed a few years ago. It was October 21st, 2019, a Sunday afternoon. I was 25, visiting my aunt for a weekend before starting a new job in Nashville. The air was cool, the leaves had just started turning, and the sky had that pale, washed-out color it gets in late fall. My aunt was inside baking bread, and I decided to go for a walk. One last quiet loop through the woods before heading back to the city. I started down the old trail that led behind the barn, following the same path I'd walked 100 times growing up. The ground was soft with fallen leaves, and the air smelled faintly of pine and smoke from the wood stove. Everything was exactly as I remembered it. The creek still ran low and shallow, weaving between smooth stones. The moss still grew thick on the north side of the trees. Even the old log cabin, a relic from before my aunt bought the land, still stood in the clearing a quarter-mile out. When I was younger, that cabin fascinated me. It had no electricity, no furniture, no sign anyone had used it for decades. Just a single door hanging off one hinge, and a small window facing the creek. It was the kind of place that looked harmless in daylight, but I could never bring myself to go inside after dark. That afternoon, I wasn't planning to go that far, but the air was calm, and the quiet had a way of pulling you deeper in. By the time I realized it, I was already halfway to the cabin. I remember glancing at my phone, 3:42 p.m., and thinking I had plenty of daylight left. Somewhere nearby, a woodpecker was tapping. A squirrel darted up a tree. The sounds were ordinary, comforting. Then I heard something else, a footstep. Not the quick shuffle of an animal, but the distinct, heavy crunch of someone stepping on dry leaves. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. I turned, scanning the trees. Nothing, just the stillness of the woods, motionless, expectant. I told myself it was probably an echo of my own steps, or maybe a deer. Still, I waited a moment before continuing. About 10 steps later, it came again. Behind me this time. Another crunch, then silence. I turned again, slower this time, and studied the trees. There was no movement, no flash of color, no sign of anything alive, but I could feel it. That uneasy awareness when you're sure someone's there, just out of sight. The path curved gently toward the creek, and through the trees I could see the cabin. Its roof was half collapsed, and one of the window panes was missing, leaving a black square like an empty eye. For a moment, I thought maybe that was where the sound had come from. Maybe the wind had pushed the loose door. I told myself I'd just check, confirm it was nothing, and head back. When I reached the clearing, everything was still. Even the birds were quiet now. The cabin stood about 20 feet away, slanted slightly to one side, weathered gray with age. The door hung open, not wide, just enough to show the dark inside. I hesitated at the edge of the clearing, and that's when I heard it again. A footstep, closer now. I spun around, heart hammering. The trail behind me was empty. Then, from somewhere to my left, across the creek, came another sound. A soft thud, like someone stepping onto damp ground. I stared at the trees on the other side. The light through the branches was dimmer now, the sun dropping lower. The colors of the leaves had faded to dull gold and gray. I waited for movement, a shape, an animal, anything. But there was nothing. And then, the cabin door slammed, hard. The sound echoed through the clearing, sharp and final. I froze. My first thought was that someone was inside, Maybe a hunter using the cabin as shelter. But my aunt would have mentioned if anyone was allowed to stay there. She hated the idea of strangers on her property. I took a slow step backward, eyes on the cabin. The door stayed shut. I called out, "Hello?" But my voice sounded small, swallowed by the trees. No answer. Another step back. Then something moved. A shadow behind the window frame. It was quick, almost like the flick of a coat or a shoulder turning away. That was enough for me. I turned and started walking fast. Not running, not yet. Just moving as quickly as I could without losing my footing on the uneven trail. Every few seconds, I glanced back. Nothing. But the forest felt wrong now. The colors colder, the light dimmer than it should have been for that hour. I followed the creek, knowing it would lead me back toward the house eventually. Except after a few minutes, I realized I didn't recognize where I was anymore. The trees looked different, closer together, taller somehow. The creek had split into two narrow streams, neither of which I remembered. I stopped and looked at my phone again. It was 4:28 p.m. The battery, which had been almost full, was at 12%, and the signal bar was gone. I stood there, trying to calm my breathing. Then came another sound, faint but unmistakable. Footsteps. Behind me, following along the creek, slow, measured, matching my own pace. I didn't turn around this time. I just kept moving, faster now, watching the ground, counting my steps. When I finally saw a shape through the trees, a fence post, the edge of the field, I nearly cried with relief. By the time I reached the back porch, the sky had gone pale blue with the first hint of dusk. My aunt was standing by the kitchen window, flour on her hands, looking confused. She said, "You've been gone for hours. I was about to call you." When I looked at my phone again, the time read 6:03 p.m. I told her what happened, the footsteps, the door slamming, and she frowned, drying her hands. Then she said something I still think about. She told me that years before she bought the property, an older man had lived out there, a trapper who built that cabin himself. He disappeared one winter in the early 1980s. Search teams found his footprints by the creek, then nothing. No body, no belongings, just his cabin, with the door open and a set of muddy tracks leading toward the woods. After that, locals said they'd hear him walking the property late at night. Boots on dry leaves, slow and steady. She laughed when she said it, like it was just a story, but I could tell by the way her voice dropped that she didn't find it funny. I didn't go back to the cabin after that. In fact, I haven't been back to the farm at all. But sometimes, when I visit my aunt in the city, she brings it up. She'll say things like, "You know, I heard something the other night, out by the fence line," and then she'll pause, like she's debating whether to tell me the rest. Last time I saw her, she finally did. She said that a few weeks after I left, she went to check the property line after a storm. When she reached the clearing, she noticed something new, faint but visible, pressed into the mud near the cabin. Footprints, large, spaced evenly apart, like someone had been pacing back and forth right in front of the door. She followed them toward the creek, and then they stopped. No sign of anyone leaving, just ended. I've tried to convince myself there's a logical explanation. Animals, wind, the shifting ground, anything but what it seemed like. But even now, years later, I can still hear it when I think about that day. The rhythm of it. The sound of a footstep landing just behind me, pausing when I did, and the slam of that door echoing through the trees. I always thought I knew those woods better than anywhere else on earth, but now when I picture them, I realize something that chills me every time. Maybe it wasn't me who knew the woods so well. Maybe it was the woods that knew me. My name's Alex, and I still don't really know how to explain what happened that afternoon in the woods. It was July 14th, 2012. I was 15 years old, at a week-long scouting camp in northern Pennsylvania, one of those dense, endless stretches of forest where you can walk for hours and never see another person. We were stationed at Camp Hawthorne, near a lake that looked like a sheet of glass on calm days. The air always smelled of pine sap and campfire smoke. That morning, the scout leader, Mr. Jensen, told our troop to collect sticks and kindling for the evening bonfire. Simple enough. So, I volunteered to go with two of my friends, Ryan and Derek. It was around 2:45 p.m. when we left the main camp. We joked as we went, arguing about who could find the best stick, laughing like idiots. The path behind the campsite was familiar. We'd been down it earlier that week for a nature hike. It was wide, covered in dry leaves and old pine needles, with sunlight breaking through the canopy like rippling gold. For the first 10 minutes, it felt completely normal. Peaceful even then. Things started to feel off. Around 3 p.m. I noticed the light had changed. It wasn't darker exactly, just different. The sunlight that had been warm and yellow now looked cold and flat, like it was filtering through smoke. I stopped walking. "Hey," I said to Ryan, "didn't we pass that fallen tree already?" He looked around, squinting. "I don't think so," but Derek frowned. "No, he's right. That's the same one from before, the one with the moss growing on the side." We laughed it off, assuming we'd looped back without realizing. Except when we turned around, the path behind us was gone. Completely gone. Where there should have been a trail, there was nothing but trees, thick, tangled trees, with branches that seemed to overlap in strange, impossible ways. "Wait, what the hell?" I muttered, taking a step forward. I brushed aside some low branches, expecting to see the familiar dirt trail beneath them. But there was just more forest. No footprints, no broken sticks where we'd walked. It was like the woods had knitted themselves together. Derek tried to laugh again, but it sounded forced. "Guess we're taking the scenic route," he said. But I could tell by the way he kept glancing around that he was uneasy too. Ryan suggested we head toward the sound of the lake. It should have been just south of camp, barely a half-mile away. So we picked a direction and started walking. The further we went, the stranger everything felt. The trees all looked the same. Tall pines with dark trunks, roots twisting like veins through the soil. Every now and then, I thought I recognized a shape. A stump, a cluster of rocks, a fallen log. But when I looked back a second time, it looked different. Like the forest was subtly rearranging itself when I wasn't looking. At one point, I glanced at my watch. It said 3:18 p.m. We couldn't have been gone more than half an hour. But the air felt heavier, like it was later in the day. We tried calling out for help, shouting the scout leader's name, shouting toward where we thought the camp was. But our voices sounded swallowed, muted, like the forest wasn't echoing back. After another 10 minutes, Derek said, "I think we're walking in circles." I started to argue, until I noticed something on the ground. A stick I'd picked up earlier, the one with a curved knot at the end. I dropped it when we first realized we were lost. It was lying right in front of us again. That's when the joking stopped completely. By 3:40 p.m., the woods had grown unnaturally dim, even though sunset wasn't for hours. The sky above the canopy looked gray, like clouds had rolled in without a sound. Ryan said he felt like we were being watched. He wasn't wrong. There was a pressure in the air, a kind of awareness. Every time we stopped moving, it felt like something was holding its breath, waiting for us to take another step. We tried marking the trees with Derek's pocket knife, small X's in the bark. But when we looked back a few minutes later, they were gone. Not carved over, just gone. At 4:05 p.m., I remember checking my watch again, and for a second, just a second, the hands didn't move. They just froze, then ticked forward, like nothing happened. That's when panic started to set in. We picked up the pace, arguing over directions, stepping over roots and tripping on underbrush. Ryan swore he saw a clearing ahead, sunlight breaking through. But when we reached it, it was just more trees, endless trees. And then, we heard voices, far away, faint. They sounded like our troop, laughing, calling out. But when we shouted back, the voices stopped instantly, and the woods went completely silent again. By 4:30, we were exhausted. I could feel sweat running down my back, and every part of me wanted to sit down and cry. Derek kept muttering under his breath that we'd find the camp soon. Ryan wasn't saying anything anymore. He just stared ahead, jaw tight. Then I saw it. Something hanging from a branch, a piece of red cloth. It looked like part of a shirt or maybe a bandana. I ran toward it, thinking it might belong to one of the leaders. But when I got close, I realized it wasn't cloth at all. It was plastic, a torn strip of red tape, the kind they use for trail marking. Except it was tied high up, maybe 8 feet off the ground, like someone had placed it there on purpose, and below it, carved into the bark, was an X. The same kind Derek had cut earlier. I looked at him, and he just stared back, pale. He swore he didn't do that one. The air suddenly felt colder, still, but heavy, like before a thunderstorm. Ryan started to whisper, "Let's go, now." So we did. We ran in the opposite direction, branches scraping our arms, our breaths sharp and ragged. I don't know how long we ran, but when we finally stopped, the trees looked normal again, the light was warmer. The air smelled like pine and earth again, and just through the trees, we saw the lake. When we stumbled back into camp, it was 5:42 p.m. Almost 3 hours had passed, but to us, it had felt like less than an hour. The scout leader was furious, said he'd been about to call for a search team. When we told him what happened, he looked skeptical at first, until Derek showed him the knife. The blade still had wood dust on it from carving those marks. But no one ever found the trees with those X's. Even when the troop leaders searched the next morning, they said the forest was too thick past a certain point, that there weren't any clear paths there at all. It's been over 10 years. Since then, I don't go camping anymore. I don't hike. I don't even like driving near forests. But sometimes, when I think about it, one detail keeps bothering me. When we first got lost, right before the trail vanished, I'd noticed something carved into a tree trunk near the start of the path. It looked like initials, but I only had time to read the first 2 letters before we left. AR. That's my name. Alex Reed, and the carving looked old, like it had been there for years. I still don't know what happened that day, whether we wandered into some strange, forgotten part of the forest, or if the woods themselves turned against us. All I know is, sometimes when I close my eyes I can still see that path, the one that should have been there. And I still wonder, if somewhere, deep in those woods, we're still walking, still trying to find our way out. It was October 12th, 2017, when my dad and I took on a last-minute construction job in the middle of the Appalachian forest, about 40 miles outside of Beckley, West Virginia. We were building a small wooden bridge over a stream for a private hunting property. It wasn't a big job, but it paid well. And Dad said we'd be done in 2 days if we worked long enough. The forest there felt different. The trees were taller, older, like they'd been there long before people ever set foot in those hills. During the day, it was peaceful. Birds, the occasional rustle of leaves. But as soon as the sun began to dip, the woods went quiet. Too quiet. It was around 6:40 p.m. on the first evening when I started to notice it. The silence. No crickets. No birds. Even the stream sounded muted, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Dad was still working, hammering the final nails into a plank, when I heard it, a snap, like a heavy boot stepping on a dry branch. It came from somewhere behind the tree line, about 30 feet away. I froze, hammer midair. Dad looked up at me concerned and asked if I was all right, and I nodded and responded saying that I just thought I heard something. He shrugged, said it was probably a deer, but there was something in his voice, a hesitation, like he didn't completely believe that himself. A few minutes later, the sun slipped lower, turning everything a dull orange. Shadows stretched across the clearing like long, thin fingers. I caught myself glancing into the trees again and again. There was this feeling, like someone was standing just inside the darkness, watching us. At one point, I thought I saw movement, a shape, Tall, thin, too still to be an animal. I quietly said to my dad, maybe we should pack up. It's getting dark. He sighed, looked at the half-finished beam. 10 more minutes, all right? I just want this side done before we lose light. I didn't argue, but my hands were shaking as I passed him the nails. The forest had gone completely still now. Even our voices sounded like they didn't belong there. Dad went to the truck to grab another tool, leaving me by the bridge alone. That's when it happened again. Another snap. Closer this time, then a slow, rhythmic sound like footsteps coming from behind the trees, moving toward me. Dad? I called out. No answer. The sound stopped. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then, something breathed. A slow, raspy exhale. It was close, maybe 10 feet away, just beyond the shadows. I grabbed the flashlight from my belt and pointed it toward the tree line. For a second, I saw nothing but darkness. Then, something pale. A face, or what looked like a face, colorless, with eyes that reflected the light like an animal's. And then it was gone. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the woodpile. Dad! I shouted this time. He came running, holding the wrench he'd gone to grab. What's wrong? There's someone out there, I stammered, pointing at the trees. I swear to God I saw someone. He scanned the area with his flashlight, shaking his head. Probably a hiker. Calm down, but there were no trails out there. No signs of any campsites, no parked vehicles for miles. We packed up fast after that. But as we loaded the truck, I could feel it. That same cold presence. Watching. I kept glancing into the woods, expecting to see that pale face again. The drive back to the cabin was silent. Neither of us said a word. That night, as we ate dinner, Dad tried to laugh it off. You've been watching too many scary movies, he said. But I noticed he kept the loaded rifle by the door before he went to bed. The next morning, he woke me early, said we'd finish before sundown. Everything felt normal again at first. Birds chirping, water running, but by late afternoon, the woods went silent again. Same as before. At 5:30 p.m., Dad left to get more nails from the truck. He was only gone a minute, and in that minute, I heard it again. Footsteps. But this time they weren't on the forest floor. They were on the bridge, right behind me. The planks creaked under weight that wasn't mine. Slow, deliberate steps one after another. I turned around and for a split second, I saw something. Tall, almost human, but its arms were too long, dragging slightly at its sides. Its skin was grayish, stretched tight over bone, its head tilted, like it was trying to understand me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. Then I heard Dad shouting my name from the truck. I blinked, and it was gone just like that. The planks still swayed slightly, like something had just stepped off them. We didn't finish the bridge that day. Dad didn't even ask why I looked so pale, he just said, "Let's go." We drove out of those woods before dark and never took another job that far out again. I tried to forget about it, but a few weeks later, I saw something online. A forum post from a hunter in the same region said he saw a tall, gray figure standing at the edge of the forest one night near his cabin. He described the same eyes, reflective, animal-like, and the same sound. Those slow, deliberate footsteps. He said it just stood there, watching him until he shut the door. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear it. The sound of wood creaking behind me. That slow, heavy breathing, and I think about how it didn't run when I saw it. It just watched like it knew we didn't belong there. And sometimes late at night, when the wind blows through the trees behind our house, I swear I can still hear it. The crunch of a single step. Then another, getting closer. Maybe some places were never meant to be built on, and maybe some things in the woods were never meant to be seen.